Hey guys, it's Blair with RevitAuto, and in this video we're going to show you how you can service the transmission on your 2012 Ram 1500. Be sure to check the video description for all the tools and torque specs that you'll need for this job. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove the 8mm bolts that are holding the pan affixed to the transmission. Now there's no gasket from the factory. What they instead use is just a big bead of RTV. So what you want to do here, this is a pretty good trick that's going to help you out, is you want to leave at least 4 bolts installed in the pan. And the 4 that I'm going to choose are going to be these upper ones here. So this top one here and that one in the corner as well. And then in the back, I'm going to leave these 2 outer ones also installed, because what I want to do is when I crack the seal between the pan and the transmission, I want to crack just the front so it captures all the fluid going out of the front, as opposed to trying to manage 7 quarts with my hand. So I'll go ahead and start pulling these guys out right now. Now when you take all the bolts off, they're not going to just fly down, because this transmission pan has a pretty awesome seal with the RTV. So even once we get all these bolts out, we're still going to need to use a screwdriver to break that seal. So now what I'm going to do is remove the rear pan bolts just a hair. I'm not pulling them all the way out. I'm just bringing them out enough to allow me to get this pan seal to break. So I've got them down just about 1/4 inch. So now I'll come to this front one here, and I'm going to remove this one about half the threads out. That one's pretty far out, and then I'll do the same on this one here. That one's out pretty far as well. Now, here's where it gets really messy and really fun. You want to break the seal between the pan and the transmission. So I'm gonna go grab a screwdriver so I can just lightly pry it down. So when you're breaking the pan seal, you wanna be real cautious, because this pan is actually pretty thin and you can easily permanently deform it. So you wanna be really gentle on where you're prying on it, so that you do not completely ruin it. There we go, awesome. Alrighty, we're gonna let that drain out for a little bit. I'm taking off the pan bolts, and I'm trying to capture as much fluid as possible into the pan. So now we're going to go ahead and pull the rest of the pan off. Now that it's off, I'm going to very gently try not to spill the transmission fluid everywhere. Alrighty, here we go. That's the good stuff. That's the juice. Now we'll slide the pan back underneath, and I'll move the pan out from underneath the car. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the filter. And this little hole right here is where the transmission fluid gets sucked up into the transmission from the pan. And at the back of it, towards the rear of the car, you're going to have what I believe is a T25 Torx head. And if you strip this, your day will be awful, because then you'll start pulling the exhaust down and crying. But we were successful. And then once you get this out, you can then remove the filter. And now I can actually just grab the filter and pull it out of its collar. So the last thing is to remove this collar right here. And you're going to want to probably use a flathead screwdriver or a punch and a hammer so that you can go ahead and clip this thing off. Sometimes you can grab it here from the side, pressing against the valve body, but you got to be really careful because you can easily damage these parts. They are aluminum and they are fragile. There we go. So what I do is I take a socket that is the exact size of the rim of this seal. And then what I do is I put my socket right up here and I make sure that it's perfectly on the edge, and then I tap it in. And then I'll just go through and just check the outer edge with my screwdriver, and that's all the way seated. I just go around in a circle, making sure that it's fully seated, which everything is. The first thing that I do is I take just a little bit of trans fluid and I just wipe it around the base here. Then I'll just grab the filter and I'll put it on. And once it gets tight, I'll only go 3/4 of a turn past, which is pretty much 7 foot-pounds on this thing, which is what the dealer recommends. I just got a little bit more to go. Alrighty, so that's good and snug. That's all she really needed. That was 3/4 of a turn past. And now we can go ahead and reinstall the filter into our collar that we already installed. So now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to just take a little bit of trans fluid. I'm going to put it on the smaller portion of this filter neck right here so that I can lightly get it to go into the collar. I'll go ahead and reinstall the T25. I'll start it with my hand, and then I'll finish it with the shallow ratchet. And once you get it in, you can just give it a light little tap, and that'll make sure it's fully seated. Then you go ahead with your ratchet and snug it up to roughly 7 foot-pounds. All right, so on that last turn, it started to get snug. So now it's snug, and I'm just going to go probably another little 1/4 to 1/8. That's tight enough for me. That's about 10 right there. She's not coming down. She's not coming out. She'll never come out of her collar. This baby's ready to rock and roll. Now what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and finish wiping off what we've already cleaned here, which is the transmission case itself. And then once we wipe that off with a nice clean rag, we'll go ahead and put a big fat bead on the pan. So now we can check in the bottom of the pan for any contamination or metal deposits. And I don't really see much of anything. So this right here is your magnet. Now this thing is going to be a fuzzy little man peach. I'm going to pull this out of here. And you can see here, this is what's collecting all of the magnetic material. And I typically like to use a clean spot of a rag to go ahead and wipe it off. Just go ahead and wipe it off a little bit to see how much metal is actually in the transmission. But this for 127,000 miles is great. I don't have any concerns about this transmission going back together. So go ahead and clean this off real thoroughly. So once you have this all cleaned up, you'll just go ahead and clean your pan out and start removing all the material and plugging this thing right back in. So once you have this pan All nice and wiped down, you're gonna go ahead, grab your magnet, place it right back, and you're gonna place it right before the first filter pickup screen. Now what we'll go ahead and do is clean off all of this RTV material so we can put on a nice new coat. So a lot of people will let little tiny specks like this go inside the pan, and that is not acceptable. If you want to do this job properly, you can't have a single speck of anything in this pan. You need to be seriously thorough and really blow it out with compressed air, come in it with a clean terry cloth. You want this thing to be literally clean enough for you to eat off of, because that's what's going to give you the longest service out of your transmission. And you can see here that we cleaned the outside of the pan. Now, if you have money and you want to blow it, you can buy a new pan and save yourself about an hour. Or if you have a wire brush, you can just scrub the crap out of this and get inside all these nitty-gritty pieces here so that you can go ahead and reapply your RTV when you put it back together. So since we're trying to save money for the client here, we're going to go ahead and just reuse the pan and put a little elbow grease into it. Okay. So I'm gonna let that sit for like 5 minutes to kind of let it get a little tacky, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put it underneath the vehicle. I'm just wiping the face down again because you don't want to have any trans fluid on the face that you're trying to mount something to. And I've got 3 bolts, quick access. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the pan and get it into position and spin it around so the thin side's on the back. And work her into position, doing my best not to get any of our RTV kind of damaged yet. If you have a second set of hands, this is a great time to have them give you some help. All right, so I'm gonna take my first one, go for an easy corner. And you also want to make sure that a majority of these have RTV on it because they are sitting inside of the pan itself. Now we're going to go ahead and get this guy threaded in. The gasket maker has left us with a nice bead for the bolts to go right into. And you want to do every single one of these with your fingers. So we're just going in here, getting it in. Now I'm going to let it rest on the exhaust as I start to go around. All right, so when you're installing the pan, these bolts are actually inside the transmission housing, and if the threads don't have RTV, the bolts will leak. So you have 2 options. You can either set the RTV how we did, where we covered the bolt holes, or you can set the RTV and go around the bolt holes and then add a little bit of RTV to the threads of each bolt as you put it back in. And I'm being really careful when I install these not to be pressing the pan up, to really just be focusing on putting the bolt up. Alrighty, so now we're on the other side here. Now I try to let this RTV sit for as long as possible. It really cures in about an hour, but it fully cures in 24 hours. But this stuff's specially formulated. They say that you're supposed to be able to just install it and rock and roll, but I really appreciate giving it some time before I let it rock and roll down the road. So the longer you can wait, the better once you get it in there. But if you're in a rush and your customer needs the truck back, it is supposed to be able to just fill up and go. So now that we've let this wait as long as we possibly can, I'll go ahead and snug this up. Now it's 105 inch-pounds, which is 8.75 foot-pounds, which is like if you breathe on a wrench, that's how much it is. But what makes this really fun is you got to go in a circular pattern from the center out. What that means is I'm going to start on the longest sides of the pan from the center bolt and work my way out to 9 pounds. So I'm just gonna lightly, and like literally 9 foot-pounds, 10 foot-pounds is nothing. So really gentle here. That's that side. And we'll have to go around twice, sometimes even 3 times, to get everything to where it needs to be. Now, if this is your first time doing this, you're gonna wanna get a 1/4 inch torque wrench. But I kind of do this every day. So my hand's got a pretty good barometer for what 10 foot-pounds feels like. So now you can see I went to the opposite side. Now I'm gonna go again to this center side here. And this is kind of my method to my madness on the 7.5 RFE. I'll go to the front side here. Alrighty, and now once I got that done, I'm just gonna go right here and get this one nice and snug. Remember, just going to like 10 foot-pounds, 9 foot-pounds. And then the next one, trying to go in a diagonal fashion all the way around. That is the key. Now I'll come to this side here. We're working away from the inside out. That allows for a nice flat surface. Now I'll come over here and then diagonal across back to the front. And this is kind of what you're doing the whole way around. Nothing too crazy, nothing too special. Now this next one, I'm gonna switch to a different ratchet so that I can get access to this back bolt. I might be able to get it here. I got very lucky. Now when I go directly across, that's where the fun's gonna begin, because then you get your, this is my thin ratchet. You could use a wrench, but I've got a thin ratchet, and that's what I'm gonna go with. And you'll know if you put enough RTV on when you see a little bit of orange, red RTV, tacky stuff coming out through the bolt heads. So this one right here is snug enough. And you'll just go ahead and do that 2 or 3 more times until everything is at 9 foot-pounds. It'll cause the pan to leak if you go too tight. All right, so I'll just go around and do it one more time, and then we should be all golden. That one's good. That one's good. And that one's good. Alrighty. Trans pan installed. I've got a nice even bead all the way around. So I'm feeling good. We'll go ahead and check these bolts on our next oil change. Make sure we did everything right. So to refill, all you'll do is you'll get a long neck funnel. You'll put it right into your transmission dipstick tube, and that's going to be your refilling point. So whenever you service this transmission, if it's a 2-wheel drive, it will require less fluid. I'll put that link in the description. But if you have a 4-wheel drive, which this truck is, after doing the service, it requires 6.6 quarts of transmission fluid. So we have 7 quarts of fluid with us, and what we're going to do is we're going to just put 5.5 quarts and then check the fluid with the truck running, and then add the remaining fluid. So now I'm just going to check to make sure that there's fluid in here, which there is. All right, which we know. But to actually check the transmission fluid level, you have to run the engine. So I'm going to go start the engine and then check the transmission fluid level. So to check it, you'll first remove it, wipe it clean, reinstall it, then pull it out and check the level. Now if we look here, we can see that we are at the add coal sign. So I'm gonna put just another half quart of fluid and we'll be good to go. And when the transmission's hot after a drive, you'll be looking up here and these two dots will recognize about a quart of fluid. After you complete your test drive, be sure to check your fluid one more time. I'm Blair with RevitAuto, and thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, happy motoring.